Did you know Alice and the Mad Hatter eloped and started a film production company together? I'm not kidding. Welcome down the rabbit hole of early cinema. What is it about Alice in Wonderland that has compelled people to revisit it and retell it countless times since its creation? What magic something is at the core of its appeal? Personally, I'd hone in on the way Alice's story brings the mundane into collision with the fantastic. Alice is a matter of fact, no nonsense girl who finds herself confronted with all sorts of seemingly irrational characters and chaotic scenarios. And the charm is how she's never shaken. She remains delightfully solid throughout it all and even forges connections with the crazy. That collision between the mundane and the fantastic is what makes Alice and early cinema so strangely powerful. In this video, we'll look at 3 silent film Alices and consider how they handled or embodied this synthesis of the fantastic and the everyday, shaping Alice adaptations for decades to come. Fair warning, these films are creepy, but creepy in a wonderful way, especially the 1915 one, but we'll get there. But first, I want to set the scene a bit, just to get us in the right frame of mind for the 1903 Alice. Back when movies were brand new, they were just one of many entertainment options. People could go to the theater or vaudeville, visit amusement parks, even attend seances. Most of this was about spectacle, big performances, dancing girls, and the dazzling illusion of magic lantern technology. In December 1895, Auguste and Louis Lumiere screened what's often called the first public film program, but they were hardly alone. All through the 1890s and into the early 1900s, different inventors and filmmakers were experimenting at the same time. It was a bit of a filmmaking free-for-all, kind of like the early days of YouTube or TikTok. Out of that chaos, 2 main traditions took shape. One focused on film's ability to capture reality, and the other on film's ability to bring to life the unreal. The Lumiere brothers coined the term actualités for their short reality-based films. In contrast, Georges Méliès's trick films use special effects and elaborate sets to visualize the impossible. His most famous film is probably A Trip to the Moon, but he made hundreds of fantastic movies, including my personal favorite, The Kingdom of Fairies. So this was the state of things when Cecil B. Hepworth produced the first cinematic Alice in 1903. The film was originally about 12 minutes long, but the version we have now is only 9. In the surviving print, any preamble with Alice and her sister is gone. Instead, the opening shot shows Alice falling asleep alone in the forest. An intertitle tells us that she's dreaming, and that she's about to follow the White Rabbit down his rabbit hole into the Hall of Many Doors. It's really quite a lot of information up front. Instead of easing us into the story the way we'd expect today, the intertitles basically hand us a little checklist of scenes, and then the film just ticks them off. But if you think about it, it makes sense. At least for something as familiar as Alice in Wonderland, the pleasure lay in watching those well-known moments reenacted in this new medium of film. Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the white rabbit in the room. Because he's huge. I just really wonder, this can't have been what people imagined when they read the books. So what was it like to suddenly see the white rabbit on screen and he's, well, human adult-sized? You know those Times Square characters and the slightly off feeling when something cute suddenly becomes huge and fascinatingly wrong? That's what this white rabbit feels like. And it only gets weirder once Alice starts to follow him, because they both have to crouch to move through his rabbit hole. And note I say through and not down, because there's no real falling sequence here. The film picks and chooses which fantasy moments get special effects, and clearly they opted out of trying to depict Alice's endless fall. So instead we get a slightly downhill stroll through the rabbit hole. It doesn't have quite the same effect. But this doesn't mean the film shies away from fantasy-driven special effects altogether. If you saw the last video, you'll remember that the big stage versions mostly skipped over the effects-driven bits of the story. This Alice actually leans into it. Its real flex is in the size-changing sequences. Alice shrinks with the potions, grows with the cake, shrinks again with the fan. This size-changing illusion wasn't exactly new in 1903. For example, here's Méliès's 1901 film, The Man with the Rubber Head. In that film, the cinematic trick is basically the whole point. But in Hepworth's Alice, the same move is put in service of a larger narrative, and it lets us share Alice's disorientation with her. We're not just wondering at the weirdness, we're caught up in the experience. The same kind of tension keeps going as Alice ends up in the White Rabbit's house. We don't actually watch her grow inside the house. Instead, we cut straight to giant Alice already wedged in the rabbit's little parlor. And I absolutely love this image. They've clearly built a tiny room set, and Alice is just stuffed in there, her arm poking out the window. It's so good. Then she uses the fan, which a minute ago shrank her down so she could get into the garden, but this time it's loaded with a different cinematic trick. It dissolves her right out of there. We cut to a shot of Alice's arm sticking out of the window and then fading away. It's another famous image from the book, just, with a film dissolve added on top. But Hepworth isn't only playing around with special effects. Look what he's doing here with the editing. Let's sit with this little run of shots for a second because there's something a bit odd about them. Watch. Alice dissolves away inside the house, and then we cut to the same moment from the outside. It's like Hepworth is saying, wait, did you catch that? Let me show you again from another angle. I've talked before about how in the very early years of cinema, films were all about spectacle and attraction, but filmmakers were also starting to figure out how to tell stories on screen. The very first films were often just a single shot of something eye-catching. By 1903, though, you've got multi-shot films like this one, where you put images together and they add up to a larger story. Another 1903 film, The Great Train Robbery, is really famous for exactly that. A little later, in the 1910s and early 1920s, the basic rules of what we now call continuity editing get nailed down. Don't worry about the term, you already speak this language without thinking about it. It's just the way movies usually guide us through time and space. One of the basic ideas is, if one shot follows another and nothing tells us otherwise, we assume time is moving forward. But in this sequence, that's not what's happening. First, we see the whole thing play out inside the White Rabbit's house. Alice uses the fan, fades away, end of moment. Then we see that same action again from outside. We're not moving forward in time, we're getting a second perspective of the same beat. Today, you could easily imagine someone calling this a continuity error. In 1903, though, it's also a glimpse of what film can do. Show us the same bit of story from multiple angles, not strictly locked into a straight line of time. And if you think about it, this kind of multi-perspective storytelling doesn't go away, it just migrates into other places like sports coverage or certain competition shows that some of us may or may not watch obsessively. If you know, you know. So I like to think of this as Hepworth really testing what film could do in 1903 to tell Alice's fantastic story. And this moment especially nails down that conflict between the mundane and the fantastic. The spectacle here is that Alice's normal size suddenly becomes monstrous inside the White Rabbit's little reality. But this isn't even my favorite moment of the film. That honor definitely goes to the Cheshire Cat, because this is not a child in a furry cat suit or an adult in a weird cat onesie, it's just a cat. A straight up cat. And what a cat, just look at that cat. Isn't it the most perfect, best cat to ever exist in the world? Yes, you are, yes, you are. What I love about this Cheshire Cat is that it does use special effects. The cat dissolves in and out, and it feels magical, even a little ineffable, because she's a real cat captured on film. It's the wonder of cats and the wonder of films stacked on top of each other. And honestly, that magic hasn't even worn off in the 21st century, given that cat videos basically still run the internet. There's another layer too. Because they went with a superimposed cat that can dissolve in and out, Alice's attempt to play with her don't quite land. The cat is there, but not really there for Alice. So this Cheshire Cat ends up feeling like the unreachable, otherworldly figure you can only watch, not actually touch or befriend. True cinematic art. In contrast, the Mad Hatter's Tea Party that follows feels kind of by the numbers. It's clearly inspired by Tenniel's illustrations, and from what we can see through the damage to the print, it's a pretty solid embodiment of them. But it still seems a bit, I don't know, perfunctory? I feel like the scene, and the Mad Hatter himself, who as we saw became increasingly central in stage versions, takes a bit of a back seat here. Maybe that's because at this point, film actors were more anonymous than their headlining stage counterparts. So we're nowhere near a star driven Tumblr sexy man Mad Hatter yet. Yes, I said what I said. Surprisingly, it's not the Mad Tea Party, but the closing court scene that really shines in this film. As we're watching it, I feel like the line between fantasy and actuality start to blur. And so does the century plus that separates us from when it was filmed. Here, most of the card soldiers are played by children, and by the end, the formal little procession just collapses into this chaos of running, laughing child carts. In that moment, any suspension of disbelief about the fictional world of Alice in Wonderland kind of drops away. It stops feeling like we're watching a royal procession and starts to feel like we're watching these actual kids on set, tearing around and having fun. We're suddenly in the moment of production, not the moment of story. And that opens up all these questions. Who were these kids? Were they child actors? Or the crew's children roped in for the day? What did it feel like to be one of them on set? Were they excited to be part of a film version of their favorite story? Did anyone involved even think in terms of the very first Alice film? Or did it just feel like one more version in a world of magic lantern and theater and other mixed media? Because this was 1903, unless someone left behind a diary entry or memoir, we'll never really know. They're all long gone, but the questions themselves are part of what makes this scene feel so alive to me. And actually, I'd argue that it's not just this closing section of 1903 that has that actuality feeling. For an adaptation of such a fantastical book, a surprising amount of this film has a quiet, caught on camera vibe. The acting isn't wildly exaggerated, it's fairly restrained, especially compared with other films of the time that were much more, let's say, expressive. Overall, the film underplays the fantasy elements of Alice in Wonderland. Yes, the costumes are clearly inspired by Tenniel, but Alice encounters all this strangeness in such a straightforward, unfazed way that it starts to feel almost everyday. Mae Clark's performance as Alice really sells that. She moves from one bizarre situation to another with this calm, determined energy that makes it easy for us to experience the chaos of Wonderland through her eyes. Almost like we're slipping into her perspective, long before filmmakers really had formal techniques for point of view, the way we think of it now. One of my favorite moments is right at the end when she refuses the executioner who's about to chop off her head right there. She shoves him away and then folds her arm with this perfect good riddance attitude that is just peak Alice, if you ask me. And speaking of peak Alice, remember at the beginning when I told you that Alice and the Mad Hatter eloped and started a film company? Yeah, we're finally getting to that. Because the people who made this film have a story that's just as fascinating as the film itself. The film was directed by Cecil Hepworth and Percy Stowe. Hepworth came from an entertainment family. His father, Thomas Craddock Hepworth, Craddock, what a name, was a famous magic lantern lecturer, showman, and author. Following in his father's footsteps, by 1903, Cecil had already written Animated Photography, the ABC of the cinematograph, a technical manual that's mostly about shutters and lenses and such, but there's this one revealing moment when he just goes off on last-rate showmen who let the film run out and leave audiences staring at a flickering white screen. The horror. He calls them born fools among lanternists, which is delightfully savage. His solution to this problem was twofold: either string several films together for an hour-long program or splice in magic lantern slides between shorter films. On the one hand, that showed how blurred the lines were between magic lantern shows and cinema in 1897. But what really strikes me is that Hepworth genuinely cared about keeping viewers in the moment, never letting a blank screen or a technical fumble yank them back to reality. Hepworth co-directed with Percy Stowe, who was basically the British Méliès, a trick cinema specialist who loved double exposures, stop motion, and visual gags. Together they brought both technical precision and a lot of creative play to this first Alice. But what really made this film possible was that Hepworth Picture Plays was a truly creative collective. Margaret Hope Hepworth, Cecil's wife, was involved in all aspects of production: script writing, producing, acting. In fact, and this is my favorite detail, she's the one inside that uncanny white rabbit costume. Margaret was a filmmaker in her own right, and her influence runs through the whole production. And then there were the two people at the heart of the film itself, Meg Clark, 18, playing Alice, and Norman Whitten, 24, the company's camera operator, playing the Mad Hatter. Clark wasn't just an actress. She worked in developing and printing, costume design, special effects, carpentry, basically everything, and that unyielding competence comes across on screen, translating into a first cinematic Alice who just feels right. She feels like that no-nonsense character we all fell in love with. Alongside Mae Clark, Norman Whitten was also learning every aspect of the business, yes, acting, but also camera operation and the technical side of production. So picture this, Alice and the Mad Hatter working side by side in the Hepworth studio, both with their hands in every part of the process, both learning how to make film. In 1907, they got married and left Hepworth Picture Plays together to start their own venture. Then in 1913, they moved to Dublin to found General Film Production Company, and in 1922, they returned to England to launch Vanity Fair Pictures. May stopped acting in 1908, but stayed deeply involved in the business side, producing, managing, building. It was a remarkable creative partnership. For years, Alice and the Mad Hatter ran film companies together, making the kinds of stories and spectacles they'd first brought to life in that 1903 garden. And while I love the idea of Alice and the Mad Hatter as filmmaking partners, what really gets me about this first Alice was the crucial role women played in its production. Both Mae Clark and Margaret Hepworth, who, if we only scratched the surface, we just list as the actresses who played Alice and the White Rabbit, were in reality pioneers of early film production. And yet, when we talk about 1903 cinema, we always talk about Edwin S. Porter, The Great Train Robbery. Yes, The Great Train Robbery is impressive for its complex storyline, and for this inarguably awesome medium shot of the outlaw shooting the viewer, which projectionists could include at the beginning or the end of the film. But here's the thing, the Hepworth Alice was about the same length and had its own playful approach to storytelling. Like The Great Train Robbery, Alice managed to tell a full story while also making each scene work on its own as spectacle. The Cheshire Cat, the Mad Tea Party, and so on. And here's proof that the Hepworths knew exactly what they were doing. In 1906, they started selling their Alice film in pieces. Showmen could buy just the scenes they wanted instead of the whole film. So film history may celebrate The Great Train Robbery as groundbreaking, but you know what? Alice was doing the same experimental work. So that's 1903. Film is still a bit wobbly. Everyone's figuring it out as they go. Jump ahead 7 years to 1910 and things look really different. Movies are longer, the editing makes more sense, studios have more money to throw around, which means our next Alice in Wonderland should be a big glow-up, flashier, more ambitious, more visually inventive than Hepworth's scrappy team effort. Right? Well, I'm just gonna come right out and say it. This is probably my least favorite of all the Alice adaptations I've watched so far. It feels very by the numbers, just ticking off the various story beats in a preset progression. And yeah, the 1903 version was episodic too, but this is 1910. I'd expect more creativity, more magic, more confident whimsy by now. When we're first introduced to the Cheshire Cat, she's a cutout, for God's sake. A huge letdown after that live cat in 1903. And what makes this especially frustrating is who's behind it. This film is directed by Edwin Porter. Yes, that Edwin Porter from The Great Train Robbery. And it's produced by Edison Studios. Yes, that Edison. And yet, 7 years later, this Alice looks a whole lot like the 1903 version, just without Mae Clark's stubborn charm. The whole thing is done up in a veneer of cuteness and feels kind of industrially packaged. Apparently this was one of the last films Porter made for Edison. He already had one foot out the door, which might account for the lack of spark. But still, Porter, I'm disappointed in you. You missed an opportunity to make a really entrancing Alice. Okay, that said, there are some genuinely charming moments, so let's talk about them. First off, at least in this film, we do actually get an image of Alice falling down the rabbit hole. Given how iconic this moment is, it's satisfying to finally see it depicted on film, essentially for the first time. The actress who plays Alice, Gladys Hewlett, is adorable, and has already made her adorableness known in trick films like The Smoke Fairy. And the Mad Hatter is also played by a child actor, Yale Boss. He's charming, and his whole little oversized Hatter outfit vibe is darling. More wholeheartedly, I really love the trick cinema Alice shrinking visuals, especially when she uses the fan to shrink. It doesn't exactly look real, but this paper cut style stop motion Alice shrinking really reminds me of Madoka Magica, or Monty Python, or even Little Big Planet. Whether they meant it to or not, it ends up highlighting the materiality of the effect, and I find that so visually compelling. When we get to the Royal Card Court, for some reason they're all doing silly walks. The Ace of Spades silly walk is definitely the winner here. And overall, here and there within the utilitarian vibes, there are some genuinely surreal moments, like Alice's enormous hand next to the teeny tiny animals, or the final closing, "you're nothing but a pack of cards" moment, which is almost Dadaistic in its unexpected visual tension, and really captures something about that final confrontation between fantasy and reality as she emerges from the dream of Wonderland. So, yes, there are some memorable moments in the 1910 version that I actually really love, but overall, it's a disappointing interlude between the 1903 and 1915 films. That said, the most interesting thing about this Alice isn't the film itself, it's its distribution history. The only remaining prints were in the 22mm Edison Home kinetoscope format, and they weren't transferred to 35mm for preservation until 2001. Edison released this Alice for an imagined home film market, families watching movies in their living rooms in 1910. In some ways, this makes perfect sense. Alice is an intimate, everyday story told to children, just as Carol envisioned. But the Edison home kinetoscope was a commercial failure, prohibitively expensive, with only about 500 machines sold before it was pulled from the market in 1914. Edison's vision of home movies was decades ahead of its time. Meanwhile, the film did get theatrical distribution, and cities from coast to coast screened it. The Wichita Eagle called it the most interesting picture yet made by the Edison Production Company, claiming that every child can now see the real Alice. So this version, flawed as it was, kept Alice alive in theaters and even in a handful of homes through the 1910s. And the distribution dream was arguably more imaginative than the film itself. Fortunately, 1915 was a different story entirely. Directed by the mysterious W. W. Young, we still don't know much about who he was. This is the genuinely creepy Alice I promised you, and it's spectacular. Before we go any further, I should say, this film's Alice is Viola Savoy, a child performer with extensive stage experience. The press loved her, framing her as a local girl who made it big. But Savoy's own accounts of the shoot highlight the challenges of making such an atmospheric film. She talked about how extravagant the production was and how hard it was to actually capture the Wonderland scenes, shooting for hours on a cold, rocky beach, which feels weirdly appropriate for this film because it's so committed to creating an immersive sense of Wonderland with all its strangeness. Now, there's a lot of mystery around this film. First off, its production company, the Nonpareil Feature Film Company, seems to have only been around for a little over a year, and I can only find a couple of other titles connected to it, the most prominent being Happy Hooligan, which, from what I can tell, was an adaptation of a then popular comic strip turned into a comedy series, or, as the Republic put it, a session of cyclonic laughter. Nonpareil's Happy Hooligan series seems to be lost media. The only versions I can find are actually from the early 1900s. But back to the 1915 Alice in Wonderland. This version was directed by W. W. Young, at least that's who the film credits as adapter and director. Other sources, including this advertisement in Variety, also cite Martin J. Faust, a prolific actor and director who'd already helmed a 1914 Jane Eyre. It's entirely possible Faust was involved, maybe even the primary creative force. But without more evidence, I'm sticking with what the film itself tells us. W. W. Young, man of mystery. Though we may not know much, or really anything, about him, the visual and narrative choices in Alice reveal a clear vision. I'd argue this is probably the best silent Alice, and definitely my favorite. One thing I find especially fascinating about this film is how it frames Alice within ideas of psychoanalysis, or at least the notion that dreams reflect one's daytime experiences and preoccupations. For a book and story that's so chaotically fantastic, this seems like a strange containing framework. And honestly, the dream explanation the movie offers totally fails to contain the uncanny valley, poetic weirdness of the film's images and scenarios. So remember how the 1903 film just skipped right to Alice falling asleep and seeing the rabbit? Not so the 1915 version. W. Young's Alice opens with an extended preamble of Alice's everyday life, even more so than the book itself. We don't start at the riverbank, but rather in Alice's home, where Alice's mother is making tarts. An intertitle tells us that Alice's mother is making tarts, quote, all on a summer's day, which I find especially amusing because if we're supposed to believe that the Knave of Hearts tart stealing incident has its root in this actual real tart making, then why use the phrasing from the nursery rhyme? And then we see that it's Alice who is tempted to steal a tart. So, is the Knave of Hearts supposed to be a displacement of Alice's tart stealing desire? Note how I am carefully not calling it tart envy. If we haven't gotten the picture yet, Alice pets both a real-life bunny and a real-life cat in a tree, and, just in case that's not enough, we also get a full-on intertitle that declares, things we do and things we see shortly before we fall asleep are most apt to influence our dreams. I find this need to explain the content of Wonderland kind of hilarious, but it's also indicative of the many debates around Alice in Wonderland's true meaning. And okay, maybe I'm implicated in this as well. Moving on. Now we start to get creepy vibes even before Alice falls asleep. As Alice and her sisters wander, the cinematography shifts. It becomes idyllic, ethereal, poetic. The two sisters wandering in a summer field, holding bunches of flowers. We're talking some serious midsummer vibes. The creepiness has already set in before Alice lays down in her sister's lap and closes her eyes, and we see him. Let's take a moment to really take this in. First off, Alice and her sister are facing towards us, and Alice's eyes are closed, so neither of them can directly see the giant bunny apparition gesturing behind them. So who is he gesturing to? I think we're meant to understand that he's gesturing to Alice's unconscious mind and to us, the viewer, in a direct address that, if you ask me, greatly surpasses the outlaw shooting the audience in the Great Train Robbery. Now that's what I call the evolution of film language. By 1915, filmmakers were beginning to figure out that playing with camera distance wasn't just a gimmick, it could create meaning. And this White Rabbit sequence delivers. First, we see him as a distant figure, gesturing while Alice and her sister stay in the foreground. We know this is the moment the dream begins. But then it intercuts, twice, to a medium shot of the White Rabbit straight on, gesturing directly at us. We're not just watching Alice dream anymore, we're inside her dream mind, seeing what she sees, following where she follows. A couple of other details to appreciate before we move on. Seriously, there's so much to say about this movie. First off, let's take in the White Rabbit costume. How dapper is he in his checked jacket, pristine white shirt, shiny watch chain, and huge bulging eyes? Throughout this movie, the costumes all have huge heads. We don't even see the actor's eyes, and it adds a level of uncanny that, in my opinion, teeters on the sublime. And then there's this intertitle, Alice Enters Dreamland. I absolutely adore this use of text design. This isn't something we saw in the earlier two versions. The graphic use of typography here echoes Carol's in the book. The positioning of the words feels like they're falling, just like Alice will soon be falling into Wonderland. But the film doesn't just rely on the intertitle to indicate that Alice is now dreaming. It follows this up with a special effects flourish, superimposition specifically, to depict Alice's dream self leaving her body to follow the White Rabbit's beckoning call. This is basically Sherlock Jr., Buster Keaton's dream self leaving his body, except Young did it 9 years earlier. And just like in Sherlock Jr., the moment we see that ghostly Alice float away, we know we've crossed over. The rules have changed. So then we get this extended transitional sequence where Alice follows the White Rabbit in a trance-like state with her eyes closed. Shades of Nosferatu. This has way more surreal horror-y vibes than I would have expected or that we got in either of the other two Silent Alices. And because this film really likes to double down, we get even more shots at varying camera distances of the White Rabbit gesturing for Alice to follow, this time right next to a giant sign that says "To Wonderland," in case you didn't get the message. Instead of relying only on intertitles to tell us Alice is now dreaming, Young gives us this extended, liminal visual journey. We feel ourselves descending into Wonderland before we ever reach the rabbit hole. There's a recent review of Young's Alice that drives me absolutely up the wall. It claims that, compared to other 1915 films, Alice's editing is awkward and outdated, and that W. W. Young seemed to think directing meant just saying action and cut, as if careful editing was too hoity-toity for him. But I think that fundamentally misreads what Young is doing here. This isn't clumsy filmmaking, it's deliberate. Young's Alice feels very concerned with creating mood and aligning us with Alice's experience of the uncanny world of Wonderland. The punctuated close-ups sew us into Alice's dream mind. It's patient, atmospheric filmmaking, and it works. Arguably, what really makes this film shine is its use of sets and costumes. The costumes recreate Tenniel's illustrations in 3 dimensions with full head masks. Not just the White Rabbit, but the Cook and the Mad Hatter, and basically all of the characters have these full-size masks, giving them uncannily huge heads that take up a third of their bodies, and we can't even see their eyes. Much of the film is taken up with the spectacle of these costumes. The film even adds a narrative conceit in which various animals make their way to an animal convention with the help of handy signs, much like the ones that enabled Alice and us to get to Wonderland in the first place. The animal convention serves as a more formalized caucus race in which we get to admire the various animals and costumes one by one before they all gather to listen to the dodo's lecture. Unless we think they simply borrowed these costumes from a stage production, these costumes look nothing like the costumes of the mainstream theatrical productions of the time. While stage Alice costumes let actors' faces and personalities shine through, Young's film buries them entirely. The film costumes almost completely hide the actor's humanity, so when you see human hands peeking out of the animal costumes, the effect is extra creepy and surreal. The set designs also really feed into the film's surreal feel, especially its preoccupation with variable sizes and how Alice feels out of control in her changing body in relation to the surrounding world. For example, in the White Rabbit's house, as Alice goes up the stairs, she seems to have to crouch a bit. She's not quite the size of the rabbit, but nor is she human-sized, or maybe the White Rabbit isn't rabbit-sized. And at this point, she hasn't consumed any drink me potion or eat me cake, or even fanned herself with a magic fan. The sizing in Wonderland is just off, and it makes her feel both oversized and undersized at once. This actually makes me think of Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, and how he built the Manderley set to make the unnamed main character seem dwarfed by her surroundings. Yes, I did just compare W. W. Young to Alfred Hitchcock. Fight me. Okay, I could imagine the production design all day, but the point is, the film plays with sets in ways that go beyond what Carol and Tenniel map out. It's 3D thinking and a significant part of what makes this film so surreally compelling. So now let's get to the good stuff, the moments in this film that made me literally pause and rewind. Because W. W. Young didn't just create a mood, he delivered some genuinely iconic scenes. First off, I have to shout out to my always favorite Father William. I love this footage of Father William. You may recognize it because I've already used it multiple times in my previous videos. It's just really something how Young brought Carol's poems and Tenniel's illustrations to life. Reviews of the time actually noted the Father William section specifically. Also, the way the story pauses to depict Father William's exploits makes me think of something I didn't have a chance to mention in my last video. In early versions of the stage musical of Alice, they actually used magic lantern slides to depict Father William. I imagine they were inserted into the play much like these shots are inserted into the film, a narrative spectacle within a narrative spectacle, so to speak. Next, the card gardeners painting the roses red out of fear of the queen. This is such a charming take on this scene. The card gardeners come off like adolescent boys getting into trouble with bad ideas and Alice has to sort them out. It has serious Wendy and the Lost Boys Peter Pan vibes, and it's exactly how I always imagined this moment. The croquet match feels like a current sports match. I mean, like they're playing football or something. They're so invested. But it's simultaneously so ridiculous and surreal. The strangeness is already inherent in Carol's original description of the croquet game, but Young really does it justice here. Now, I'll admit that at first I was a little disappointed with this film's take on the Cheshire Cat. Somehow, just using a full costume for the Cheshire Cat doesn't work as well as it does for the other animals. Maybe it's the costume itself. The feline magnificence just feels lacking. But all is forgiven when we get the giant cat head in the sky hovering over the croquet match. Pure visual genius. I'm going to say something blasphemous here. I think this shot is somehow even more effective than the original Tenniel illustration on which it's based. Something about the realism of the filmed image combined with the surrealism of what's being shown makes it extra crazy. And in the Tenniel image, the king and queen are huge too. But here, the Cheshire Cat's superiority really does seem to hover over the humble card court, who were just having a good old game of flamingo croquet. It feels like the Cheshire Cat has all the power, which is how it should be. Finally, I need to return to the costumes, but specifically to those of the griffin, the mock turtle, the walruses, and the lobsters. These costumes are so extravagant they're transcendent. I get Jim Henson vibes here. But specifically, the costumes that give me the most pause are those of the lobsters. They're so detailed, so realistic, that at first I really wondered how on earth these lobsters, or any lobsters for that matter, could, dance a quadrille. But then when we get to the dance part, they're wearing striped pants. This might be my favorite visual from the whole film. Put those lobsters on the cover of Vogue. But here's where things get more complicated. I've been crediting W. W. Young as the visionary behind these extraordinary visuals, and that's who the film itself credits as adapter and director. But there's another name associated with the production, Charles R. Macaulay, who is listed in the restored version as producer, scenery designer, and costume supervisor. So as I was digging into the back pages of all sorts of publications trying to figure out who actually made this film, I found this article from Moving Picture World, published in December 1914, that changed the whole narrative. It read, "The picture business looks so good to Charles R. Macaulay, for the last 10 years cartoonist on the Evening World, that he has decided to give up newspaper work entirely and devote his whole attention to the production of pictures. Already the Union Photoplay Company, of which Mr. Macaulay is president, has produced Alice in Wonderland. The costumes, the making of which he supervised himself, follow the drawings of Sir John Tenniel, known on 2 continents as the foremost cartoonist of his time. Mr. Macaulay designed also the scenery used in the picture." Wait, let's back up. Union Photoplay Company? Not Non-Pari Feature Film Company? And Macaulay was president, personally supervising the costumes and designing all the scenery? Suddenly, those uncanny caricature heads take on a different weight. Macaulay was a political cartoonist for a decade at the Evening World. Like Tenniel, his career pre-Alice was dedicated to making larger-than-life caricatures that commented on the social and political realities of his time. He was also an acclaimed and influential illustrator. Searching up his work, I realized he actually illustrated many of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I, as a Sherlock Holmes fan pretty much from the womb, grew up with his work. Macaulay's art was expressive, moody, and incisive. Those oversized masks with mechanized eyelids, those surreal proportions, that's not just faithful to Tenniel. That's one artist, Macaulay, inspired by another, Tenniel, to create a powerful cinematic interpretation of yet another visionary artist, Carol. So what happened? Why does the film credit Non-Pari and W. W. Young if Macaulay's company, Union Photoplay, produced it? Here's what I've been able to piece together. Union Photoplay seems to have disappeared in 1914. Somehow, through financial trouble, distribution deals, company restructuring, the film ended up under Non-Pari's banner by the time it was released. And that's when W. W. Young's name appears as director. Maybe Macaulay created the visual design under Union Photoplay, and when the film changed hands to Non-Pari, Young and Faust came on board to complete or recut it. Maybe Young was involved from the beginning, but Macaulay controlled the visual design. Maybe Macaulay directed the whole thing and Young was credited for distribution reasons? Maybe Young is a pseudonym, a placeholder. At this point, we just don't know. What we do know is that Charles R. Macaulay, cartoonist turned film producer, was a key creative force behind this film's most distinctive feature, its uncanny, surreal, immersive take on Wonderland. Despite what Moving Picture World proclaimed, Macaulay didn't exactly trade in his cartoonist career for film. In fact, he continued to do both to critical acclaim throughout his life. But he did bring his artistic vision to the cinema for Alice, and we have no doubt him to thank for those lobsters quadrilling in their snazzy striped pants. Maybe Mystery Man W.W. Young was involved too. If you have any info on him, I'm dying to know. But understanding who made the film is only half the story. We also need to ask who actually got to see it and where. Because the 1915 Alice didn't just reach audiences through regular movie theaters. This Alice in Wonderland was distributed by the American Motion Picture Corporation, which had previously been called the Church Motion Picture Corporation. It was founded by William H. Barr, who liked to present the AMPC as a wholesome alternative to the morally corrupting commercial film industry. But the AMPC's agenda was anything but neutral. Barr was openly anti-union and racist, and the organization saw churches, civic groups, and schools as the perfect place to spread their brand of educational messaging. So how did this Alice end up on the AMPC's roster? Well, from one angle, it makes perfect sense. A beloved children's book, Tenniel-inspired costumes, no obvious political content, safe, wholesome, educational. But at the same time, it's hard to square this Alice in Wonderland's genuinely unsettling surrealism with anyone's idea of neat moral uplift. Because of this unlikely partnership with the AMPC, Young's Alice in Wonderland didn't just have commercial runs, it also played at a lot of school and other educational events. The press was weirdly gushy about these screenings. The Times-Union in Rochester, New York called it, quote, the most entertaining, appealing, and instructive motion picture play that has ever been put on the screen. Now, when I actually stop and think about this film being shown in a school setting as educational, despite all of this, honestly, it makes sense. You probably have your own memories of this, but I have crystal clear memories of being herded into my elementary school auditorium to watch some weird shit in the name of education, or in the name of keeping a bunch of 7 to 12-year-olds occupied for a couple of hours.
Wow.
Alice in Wonderland has always lived in that space between the captivatingly strange and the educational. In a way, that's totally fitting for deacon mathematician storyteller Charles Dodgson, aka Lewis Carroll, who I strongly suspect would have approved of his Alice film being shown in school settings. Okay, so having just spent far longer than any of us probably anticipated with these 3 deeply strange films, what can we take away from all of this? What sticks with me most is how each of these cinematic Alices layers onto the last. 1903 Mae Clark's stubborn posture, the 1910 vision of Alice absolutely dwarfing the Wonderland animals, the 1915 White Rabbit's mesmerizing blinking eye mechanism. Together, they build this collective idea of what Alice in Wonderland was, is, and could be. And of course, these films didn't make themselves. They're the work of all the creative minds that shaped Wonderland along the way. Mae Clark performing Alice while also building sets and cutting film. Margaret Hepworth inside the White Rabbit costume, but also running the business. Cartoonist turned producer Macaulay sketching those lobsters' incredible striped pants. Even Edison and the AMPC imagining film Alice projected in homes and schools. All of them were experimenting with how the medium of film could bring Wonderland to life, through editing, special effects, performance, and distribution. And all of that experimentation filters into the Alice in Wonderland we've inherited today. So now I'm curious, which of these 3 silent Alices has stolen your heart or your nightmares? Do you buy into the uncanny genius of the 1915 version? And who do you think was really pulling the strings there? As I move into the early sound era in the next episode, which Alice do you think I absolutely cannot skip? And if you're a secret defender of the 1910 Alice, tell me in the comments, did I judge her too harshly? Okay, tell me your thoughts down below. I really will read them while I'm planning the next part of this series, so consider this your chance to help shape the syllabus for our next trip through Wonderland. Thanks so much for sticking with me through all this silent era strangeness. I'll see you when the Alices learn to talk.